So good morning, everybody. Good morning, Boker Tov. Today we're going to have our own Torah fires raging in a good way. You know that we tell our children stories many times to put them to sleep. But I think when we study the stories of the Torah and which is the stories of life, it's meant to wake us up of how we can approach our lives in a better, more successful, happy, joyous, productive way. That's really why we're studying the Torah, because many times we see the same recurring theme. So is it that it's a broken record, or is it that really Torah really comes down to one fundamental principle? Why am I here? And what is my mission? And where am I heading? What am I doing with that purpose and that mission in life? We said we were going to do some of the book of the Gate of Trust. And I'm noticing more and more how in this next few weeks of the Torah portion, the past week, this week, we read the story of Joseph. And you read the story of his life. And when we discuss the story now, I want to make it a little personal. Because if you read the story of his life, you see that he becomes who he is because he has trust in God, bitachon. It is only his trust in God that gets him through what I have to say, hell and back. So last week we discussed the power of forgiving and reconciliation. Now you have to understand what happened last week. He meets up with the brothers, he tests them. He puts them into prison for 3 days. He makes them come with the youngest brother back, Benjamin. He hides his goblin in Benjamin's knapsack. He hides the money that they paid for the grain back into their rucksacks. He could have right away said, "Boys, I am Joseph, your brother. Recognize me?" He doesn't do that. When they come to Egypt to buy food, because there's a raging famine in all over the world. Everyone is coming to Egypt. Egypt is a superpower. They're the only ones with food to purchase. Everyone is coming to Egypt. Egypt is raking it in, and everyone else is starving. He could have just said, "I'm Joseph. I forgive you." But it wasn't only enough that he forgives them. A family that goes through such a crisis, you don't sell your brother and think he's dead and the family is not suffering from internal trauma, where they know they deceived their father. They made believe he was killed by a wild animal. Remember, they dip his multicolored coat in blood of a sheep, which is similar to human blood, to deceive their father into thinking he was killed by a wild animal. Jacob has no peace because, as we discussed, just like in the hostage situation, when your child is really alive, you can't find peace. You haven't buried the child. He never saw the body. So he internally, though he's told your son has been killed, he internally, it's not so. His son is really alive. So there is that internal feeling that maybe my son is not dead. He can't make peace with it, even though he's being told, yes, your son was killed. It's a horrific way to live. So now, this week's Torah portion starts where the Joseph had assessed his brothers in the previous Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is Vayechi. I am Joseph. And today we're going to intertwine the two Torah portions because they're very connected. This Torah portion, to sum up what happens, so Joseph reconciles with his brothers. He reveals his identity. And he says, bring father and the family down here, and you'll settle here with me. Why? Because there's a famine, there's a depression all over the world. The only place you can really sustain yourself now is in Egypt. So now Jacob comes down with the ganze mishpacha, and they settle in Goshen. And I'll explain soon why in Goshen. And they're living a prosperous life, so much so that Jacob now is coming to the end of his days. He's about to die. He's lived there 17 years. And he says to his family, come to me. I'm going to bless you with my final, last will and testament. And please, when I die, bury me in the land of Israel. I want to be buried. And remember, a few weeks ago, we discussed the whole drama, how they can't bury him because Esau says it's my, remember with Leah, it's my plot, there's no place, and the whole story there unfolds. And it says that Jacob lived his best years in Egypt. 70 years, his best years. Why? Because he's reconciled, he's consoled. He's been mourning for 22 years since his son at 17 was killed, supposedly. He's been mourning. 17 years later, he's reunited. 22 years later, he's reunited with his son. And for 17 years, he's living in Egypt with the family. And now he's about to pass on. And it's a very interesting story. He calls all the 12 tribes, he gives them each an individual blessing and their mission statement, what they should be doing. But I want to focus in on when Joseph comes to get his blessing and he brings his two sons, Manasseh, the younger son, Ephraim, the older, Manasseh, the older son, Ephraim, the younger son. I want to focus on that thing that happens. So Joseph comes to his two sons, come to grandpa. Grandpa's going to bless you. And it unfolds in a beautiful, beautiful way. And I want to read what happens so you know what happens. Beautiful, beautiful. Let me get it. Okay. Okay, so now Joseph comes to his father's home. And he says, Joseph says to his father, there are my sons that God has given me. And I pray thee that you should bless them. Now his father's eyes were dim. He didn't see that well. So he brought them near to him and he kissed them and he embraced them. And Joseph and Yaakov, Israel, Jacob, the grandfather, says to Joseph, to see thy face, I had never thought that I would ever see your face again. And Yosef brings them from between the knees of his father, and he falls down by his father in gratitude, and he puts the older son on the right side to get the older son gets for the right hand, and he puts Manasseh to get the blessing with the left hand, right? So he thinks Father Jacob is going to put his right hand on the older son, Ephraim, and put his left hand on Manasseh, right? The older first, the left hand on the second. As he brings his sons, his father does a switcheroo. He puts his right hand on the younger son, Manasseh, and he puts his left hand on the older son. Now, remember, we said he didn't see very well. So this is what Joseph says to him. He says, Papa, hold on. Let me read this because it's important to hear. All right, let me read it from my paper better. Okay, because I can't find it here. So when Joseph saw that his father was placing I'm reading from the Torah portion, his right hand on Ephraim's head, he thought it was wrong. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Vayomer Yosef Elaviv loy keinavi. No, Papa, he says. He's the firstborn son. Place your right hand on his head and put your left hand on his head. So he thinks his father makes a mistake. He says, Papa, don't do that. So what does Papa say? What does Jacob say? His father objected, saying, I know, my son, I know. He too shall become a people, the older son, and he too shall be great. Yet his younger brother shall be greater than him, and his offspring shall be plentiful enough for nations. So he blessed them that day, saying, by you, Israel shall invoke blessings, which means Hashem, God, should make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. He put the younger brother before the older brother. Okay, so you understand what happens? He switches his hand. His son just says, no, Papa, you got it wrong. Ephraim is the younger son. Why are you putting your right hand on the younger? Put your right hand on the older, which is Ephraim, and put your left hand on Manasseh, the younger. Okay? And his father says, I know, but this is what has to be done this way. So in other words, his father was not senile or it was a loss of sight. He knew exactly what he was doing. So let's unfold the story here. So the story is what is really Joseph saying to his father? Daddy, don't make the same mistake. Don't let the same thing happen again, where now the younger brother is sold by the older brother because of jealousy.
Wow.
You understand? Look what happened to me.
Yeah.
Brothers were jealous of me. Look what happened, what they did to me. Now, if you again show favoritism, the older one, Manasseh, will be jealous of the younger one, and the same thing will happen. We're going to repeat the crime of the past. So what he's really telling his father is, let's not do this again. I suffered enough. But his father says, no, my son, no, my son. Why? Because he says, no, twice, because he says to Joseph, no. When he puts his hands on the boys, on the sons, he remembered Jacob is a very special person. He's a prophet. He's a holy person, a very special person. He feels the energy. He feels that the older one is not jealous. He doesn't see a body. You know how you see body language sometimes? Somebody's jealous or angry or upset. They don't say anything, but you feel it. He sees right away that the older one has no jealousy. He shows no pain. He's not thinking, oh my gosh, what is grandpa doing? Why am I being secondary? And then when he puts his hand on the younger son, what should he be feeling there? Arrogance. See? Grandpa favors me. Ha! I'm the younger, but he only feels humility in these two boys. He realizes that the sons of Joseph are like their father. They have a very fine quality. If Grandpa Jacob is putting my hand on my head this way, on the left or the right, this is how it has to be. So when Jacob puts his hands on the boys, on the sons, and he doesn't feel any pushback, so to speak, he realizes that this is not going to be reoccurrence. It's a different people. It's a different story here. So that's number one. Number two is the reason that commentaries, and this is just a simple explanation, is like what he says. He saw from the younger son, Manasseh, Joshua, the successor of Moses, would be born. From him would become leadership, certain leadership qualities. So he needed to have the right hand blessing because he saw who's coming from this boy, from this young man. And he says it. They're both going to be great, but this Manasseh, from him, Joshua is going to come. The leader after Moses, who's going to bring the Jewish people into Israel and settle them into Israel. Joshua, again, was no plain guy. He was the...
You mean from...
Sorry, go ahead, Diane.
You mean from Ephraim? Or is it from...
From Manasseh, from the younger son.
Manasseh?
Oh, no, sorry, from Ephraim. Sorry, I keep mixing them. Ephraim
Okay.
is the younger. Good, thank you for correcting me. He sees that from Ephraim, the younger son will come, the successor to Moses. Notice, Moses' successors were not his own children. It was Joshua. Again, when somebody asked, why doesn't the Rebbe have a successor? He didn't have a son, maybe a stranger. A leader has to be earned. It's not inherited. Moses' son don't become the next leaders just because they're Moses' son. Joshua is chosen by God to be the next leader because he's the one that has that spiritual energy and holiness to be able to lead the nation into the land of Israel when Moses passes away in the desert and he's not permitted to enter into the land of Israel with his people. So so when Jacob sees that from the younger son Ephraim will come Joshua, again through prophecy, he blesses him. That's why he gets the blessing with the right hand. Now, another interesting tidbit, remember the past history. What did Jacob experience? He also experienced this. When Esau, the older brother, is supposed to get the blessings, remember? And he disguises himself to get the blessing because his brother Esau is a killer, a murderer, a hunter, an idolater. He has to take the blessings, steal the blessings. So he's very sensitive to older, younger. He knows the story of the older and the younger because he himself experienced it. So he's not a guy that's, fresh out of the park, so to speak. He doesn't have any understanding of older, younger. He very much has. His brother wanted to kill him for that. So you see, there's a very psychological things happening here behind the scenes. It's not so simple. I blessed you, sei gesund. Now I can pass away. There's a lot happening. There's a lot happening here between Joseph, his sons, and Jacob, and so on. And now let's delve into this a little bit deeper, because look what Jacob then says, that for all generations, parents will bless their children with the same blessing that I have blessed Manasseh and Ephraim and Manasseh. He puts Ephraim the younger first. The blessing that I gave Ephraim and Manasseh, which parents sing at night. There's a beautiful bedtime song parents sing to their children, which has the blessing that Jacob gave his two grandsons. And now the question is, why, for all eternity, will we bless our sons with the blessing that he gave Ephraim and Manasseh? When we bless our daughters, we bless them that you should be like Sarah, Rivka, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. When before Yom Kippur, the parents bless their children. Before the wedding, the parents bless the children. Before the chuppah. Every Friday night, parents bless their children. So when they bless their daughters, they say, my darling daughter, you should be like the matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. But when we bless our sons, we say you should be like Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh and Ephraim, sorry. I'm mixing, no, who's the younger?
Ephraim.
Manasseh.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. I don't know why I have such a blank thing. Hold on.
okay.
Ephraim is the older. Manasseh
okay.
is the younger. So you corrected me, but I was wrong. Okay.
Okay.
Let's clarify. Manasseh is the younger son. Ephraim is the older son. Yeah. Because it says Joseph took the two of them, Ephraim with his right hand and Manasseh to the right. Manasseh is the older, Ephraim is the younger. Okay, phew, clarified, okay? Diane, repeat it so everyone hears it.
Manasseh is the older, Ephraim is the younger.
Excellent, okay. So now we're corrected. So that's why we bless our children now. Why? Why not do like the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Why are we blessing with the same blessing? So there's a beautiful, magnificent insight. Am I going too fast? Are we all on the same page? All good?
Yes.
you have to understand, first of all, the analysis of their names, why they were named the way they were named. And B is how they grew up. How did they grow up? Who can elaborate? Where did they grow up? How did they grow up?
In an Egyptian society, but still following Jewish rule.
Beautiful, beautiful. The lives of Menashe the younger. I'm going to keep saying it till I remember it. And no, Menashe the older and Ephraim the younger. Their lives were more similar to our lives. They did not grow up in Israel as shepherds, very insular, secluded from society. They grew up with their father, Joseph, second in command to the king, hosting politicians, kings, queens, other kings in society. They were celebrities. Their father was viceroy of the superpower of the world. Think of the vice president, but with full power to run the country. Pharaoh basically gave Joseph complete control of the country. Do whatever you want. You make all decisions. You make all the rules and regulations, the laws. Anybody wants something, you go to Joseph. He's like, I guess, the president under Pharaoh. And they are the sons of Joseph. They didn't grow up in an insulated Kvar Chabad, Meir Sha'arim, Jerusalem, even Jerusalem. They grew up in a very secular society, a very corrupt society, a country that worshipped idols. They worshipped the Nile River. They worshipped the sheep. They worshipped all kinds of idolatry. They were a corrupt nation. And yet, they followed in the path of their father. You can't tell young adults what to do. You could shame them, but once they're young adults, they could do whatever they want. And they chose to follow, even though they didn't have the Torah yet, they followed the way of God, the way of monotheism, the way of Torah and mitzvahs. Because it says that the tribes, the children of Jacob, all followed Torah and mitzvahs. They weren't obligated, but through prophecy, they had the Torah and they had the mitzvah. So they followed those ethical, moral way of life. So because they grew up in something that resembles what the future would look like, Jacob said, this is the blessing that we have to give our children. A blessing that I'm giving Menashe and Ephraim. This is the blessing for eternity. Because they are symbolic of the challenges that we're going to face. Jews living in the world, the superpower. We have whatever we want to materialism, basically. No one is persecuting us in the United States. We can do whatever we want. And yet we choose to follow the path of God, one God, Torah, mitzvahs, morality, ethics. And this is the blessing that has to be for all ages, because this is the way the future is going to look till Mashiach comes. So that's why when he blesses the two sons of Joseph, he says, this is going to be the eternal blessing for all. This sets the standard for the future of our children, for our youth. When a parent stands and puts the heads on their child, you say should be like Menashe, like Ephraim and Menashe. They grew up in a horrific secular world, but they themselves, with their family, they were on the straight path of belief in God, morals, ethics, values, continuing the traditions of his parents and grandparents. And when Jacob sees his grandsons, he can't believe it. Wow, what a testimony to the father Yosef, which now I'm going to go into a little bit. Now, when Joseph sees his brothers, he says, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. They're dumbfounded, the Torah says. They don't say anything when he says that. They don't know what to say. Then he repeats it again. He says, I am Joseph, who you sold into slavery in Egypt. So first of all, why does he repeat himself? He says, I'm Joseph, okay. Why does he say, I'm Joseph, sold you into slavery? We just said he forgave them. Why rehash the crime of the past? Did you forgive or didn't you forgive? Asher racharta l'Mitzrayim. He's not reminding them of their crime. He says, I am Joseph because you sold me to Egypt as a slave. I'm only here because of what you did to me. Asher also means thanking. Thank you, because what you did to me brought out who I was meant to be, Joseph. Joseph. That's why, remember, we discussed last year when Moses breaks the first tablets. Remember, he shatters them because he sees them worshiping the golden calf. Remember that story?
Yep.
And again, the trauma that Moses goes through, he's horrified at what he did, and God gives him the second tablets 40 days later. What does he say to him? Asher shibarta. And the commentaries explain, thank you for breaking the first tablets. Why is God thanking him? Why didn't he just put it in a safe for safekeeping, hide it away? Why break them? God says, thank you for breaking them. Because when he breaks the luchos, he brings out in the Jewish nation the greatest potential that when you do something so horrific, you worship idolatry right after you heard God's voice giving you the Torah, you can always come back. It's in the broken pieces that we find our greatest growth. It's in the pain and the suffering at times and challenges that bring us back to where we have to be. He says, I am Joseph Asher. Thank you for selling me, because when you sold me, I became who I was meant to be. I could never be Joseph if you hadn't sold me. Now, it's a different question. They shouldn't be the ones. If God wanted them to be sold, okay, they shouldn't have been the ones to do it. That's a different story. That's a different discussion. And that's why we say, was Joseph, this is our quintessential quote of the quotable quotes, was I sent or was I sold? He tells them, I was sent. God sent me. You think you sold me. God sent me. Was I buried, as we discussed, when he gets put into the pit, or was I planted? I was planted. I wasn't buried. So Joseph is who we look on to how do we view pain and suffering and what he went through. There's a very heartbreaking part of the story that if you notice that when Joseph, in the early Torah portion, remember we tell the story how the brothers took him, they ripped off his coat and they threw him into a cistern, right? A giant pit like a cistern. And it says there was no water in the cistern. Why did it tell us there was no water? So Rashi says that there was no water, but there were snakes and scorpions. Thank you very much. So he wasn't drowning in the cistern, but guess what? He's put in there, and later on, when he comes to Paro, listen to this unbelievable reason the Torah even tells us about the cistern. There was no water in the cistern, only snakes and scorpions. When he goes to Paro and he unfolds the economical plan, how to save the country and save the world from famine and hunger and the depression, he says to Paro and the people under him, when you store the food, you have to store it in a moisture-proof place. There cannot be even a drop of water, because water rots out, wheat rots out, right? If you put fruits and vegetables in the refrigerator too long, the moisture kills your tomatoes, your lettuce, your cucumbers. You know, I was reading an article, how to preserve fruits and vegetables in the refrigerator for a longer time. You have to wash it, you have to dry it, you have to wrap it in paper towels, a ganze Geschichte. So when he plates the plan, he remembers that the cistern was bone dry.
Yeah, but there were snakes.
There was no moisture. And that unfolded in his eyes that if something needs to at times be preserved, there can't be moisture in it. That's how it clicks in his mind. So you see, everything that happens to him is not, oh my gosh, they put him in the cistern. And then when he's put into prison and he meets the butler and the baker, remember, and he interprets the dreams, and he says to the butler, and when you're released, please speak on my behalf. Get me out of here. And the butler forgets. But then the butler remembers because Paro has a dream. He says, oh yeah, there's a guy in prison. He knows how to interpret dreams. Again, if he wouldn't have been put into prison and interpret the dreams of the butler and baker, then the butler and baker would have not known about him. If he hadn't gone over to them that morning and say, fellows, why do you look depressed? Why are you down and out? Duh, we're in prison. How should we look? Jumping for joy? Right? But he, because of his compassion, and he looks out for his fellow, and he says, guys, why are you down and out? And they tell him, we had these crazy dreams. It's really bothering us. If he hadn't done that, he would have never been able to interpret their dreams. They wouldn't have known he knows how to interpret dreams. They never told Paro. He would never have been released. So you see that everything happens to him directly on his path of how it unfolds. Now, why am I sharing this? To show you how Yosef is so in tune that he realizes as he's healing from this horrible pain and trauma of the abuse given to him, that he was abused by his brothers, how he starts to deal with his trauma by realizing that everything happened to him led him to where he be able to say, I am Yosef. Most people of trauma and abuse, why do they want to kill themselves? They have no identity anymore. They have been so demolished, ripped apart, abused, like unfortunately the hostages. They have no sense of self. 2 hostages already killed themselves. They can't say, I am Joseph. They're not able to recover from the trauma, rightfully so. Joseph is able to face his brothers, his abusers, and say, I am Joseph. Why? Because you sold me. You know what that means? Think of Joseph. Forget about how great this guy is, how he's a leader of the Jewish nation. Think of him as a regular person in our day. You would meet a guy like that. You would be blown away. Wow, how did he do this? He's Superman. How is he not lashing out at his brothers and killing them to appease his pain? We know revenge is never an appeasement, but still.
Is he trying? I have a question. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So is he trying to also alleviate his brother's guilt? Do they have guilt?
So last week I discussed how everything he does is, you see, that also shows you about his personality. Who worries about those who abused you? You're worrying about your self-healing. He knows when he confronts his brothers that there'll be no healing, there'll be no family unity, even if he recovered. He's been by therapy for 25 years. He's come to terms with his trauma and abuse. He is reconciled. He's a successful businessman. He now has a wife and children. He doesn't even need to reconnect his family. Keep them away from me, he might say, right? Because why would I want to be exposed to them? He realizes there can never be a reunification because of their guilt. He went to therapy, but did they go to therapy? He reconciled with his life, but did they? Or how did they deal with 22 years that we sold our brother? Most probably he's dead, because how do you survive slavery in Egypt? They're cruel, inhumane people. And we lied to our father. Not only our brother, our father has never gotten out of his depression. Yaakov literally mourned for 22 years. You know what that means? He never got out of his funk. To have a father, like, Unfortunately, sometimes the parent can't get out of it. Again, we're not blaming. This is life. The emotional trauma of having to lose your son from your favorite wife who died as a young mother. Joseph was 8 years old when his mother died. His brothers sell him into slavery. And remember, I mentioned that there's no conversation between Joseph and his brothers. How come the Torah doesn't say that when they put him in the cistern, he cried out, "Help, help, somebody get me out of here"? No. And when they take him out of schlep him out of the pit, and the slave drivers are coming through the road and they sell him for money, you don't hear him saying to his brothers, "Please, please don't sell me." Or to the slave drivers, "Please, my father has more money. He'll pay you off." Not a word from Joseph. Why? Why isn't Joseph talking? So there's an analysis of this. You want to go a little deeper, we go a little bit of this. He could have been talking, but he might have been silently talking. Like he was so shocked, words couldn't express his pain. But we do know he spoke. How do we know? Because when brothers come to Egypt the first time, right? He accuses them of trying to make a revolution in his country. He says this, really, 10 of you came to my country in different entrances, different borders. Why is it here? Oh, we're here to buy food. No, you're not. Put them into prison. They're here to steal and take over the country. There's 10 able-bodied men. They came in through different directions because their father told them, when you go buy food, don't come all one way. They'll think you're an army. There's 10 of you with your camels, with your helpers, with your guards, with your entourage. So he puts them into jail for 3 days. And remember, they speak Hebrew. He speaks Hebrew. No one else speaks Hebrew. So he eavesdrops. He goes to the prison and he hears what they're saying. This is what they say. They go, "Why is this happening to us?" They say in prison. And the brothers say, "You know why? Because what we did to our brother. Hashem, God, is now taking revenge. When he cried out to us, when he begged us not to put him in the pit, when he begged us not to sell him to the slave drivers, we didn't listen to his cries." So the brothers reveal the conversation that was not said then, but now we know that there was a conversation. You see what happens here?
Mm.
The Torah, when it tells the story of the brothers selling, it's mum, you don't hear a word. But now, in prison, the Torah reveals what happened because they're rehashing it. And Joseph overhears it. And he speaks Hebrew. They don't know. First of all, they don't know he's eavesdropping. Second of all, they don't know he speaks Hebrew. When they're talking amongst themselves, he understands everything. He makes believe he doesn't. He has an interpreter. He uses an interpreter. He makes believe, "Oh, I don't speak Hebrew. I need an interpreter here." Understand? He has a whole plot. So in the conversation of the brothers repenting, and they say, we were punished by God now because of what we did to our brother. We put him in prison. Now we're in prison. So why is that conversation so important? First of all, we hear what did happen. But second of all, that's when Joseph realized that they started to feel remorse. He was wondering, did they even care? But he sees now how horrified they are, and they realize what they did. That was part one of the reconciliation. Last week we went to the details, but that's just one little tidbit. Then there's a beautiful story, very heartbreaking story. By the way, I never heard this story till recently when I was reading this holy book, which tells the story. It says when the slave drivers took Joseph, they were traveling back to Egypt. They passed. What did they pass? Try to guess. Where did they pass on the way out of Israel? Remember, she was buried there, so that when
The grave, yes.
grave of whom?
Rachel?
Rachel, his mother. Remember, she was buried in Beit Lechem. Why? Because when the Jews would be exiled out of Israel, on their way out, they would have where to cry and beg for mercy. Mama Rachel, our mother Rachel. So on the way out of Israel, he passes his mother's tomb. So he's in chains, but he runs to the tomb and he begins crying. The story, the Medrash tells us, he crying, Mama, Mama, wake up, save me. I'm 17 years old. You got to get me out of here. Why did you abandon me? He cries out to his mother and he's screaming, the Torah tells us in the commentaries. And the slave drivers start beating him up. Why are you making so much a ruckus? We don't want people to know that we took you, and then you'll be freed by other people in Israel. And they start beating him till he's quiet. So Joseph is not quiet when he's taken. We just don't know about it in the actual passages. But if you read the commentaries and the Medrash, it alludes to that, to what really happened, that he was screaming and crying. He wasn't a silent victim. He screamed, he cried, but it didn't help him. So yeah, now I'm sharing this, you understand what really happened to this boy. You know, we read the story, but we don't really take it personally. But think about if it was your son, your child, your brother. Wow, horrible what happened to him. And then he goes and he says, Ani Yosef. You know what it means? That he's 30 years old now, he's 17 when he's sold, and he's able to stand up tall and say, I am Joseph. You know what an accomplishment that is? And like, he's one of my favorite characters in the Torah, because he doesn't have an easy life. He has a very difficult life, and look how he soars to the top. Why? One key thing. Why? You know, my tagline,
Good soul.
it says a conversation and discussion. So I can't be the only speaker here. Go ahead.
Well, he believes God has a plan for him.
Very good. Okay. Diane, what did you say?
They said he has a good soul. He just is a positive thinker. He's been blessed with looking for the good, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, every answer is correct. But trust in God. Bitachon.
Right, of course.
Remember, we discussed that, like, that is the key, connecting to God. I don't think anybody could go through what he went through without, remember I said, how did people survive COVID? The atheists. How does anybody survive any catastrophe with not knowing that there's a divine plan, not knowing it's not up to you only? Because if we're running the world, ayvei, the Jewish expression, achenvei, right? That means I'm responsible for the forest fires in LA. I didn't prepare water. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have prepared water. Let's not say that mankind was meant to sit back and relax. As we discussed in the book, the gate of trust in God doesn't mean you sit back on a chair and let your life unfold. Doing everything possible to make the world and your life and fulfill your mission. But knowing there's a divine plan, knowing you have to trust God. So, you know, but not having that, I don't see how, and you know, and I'm not like a role model of this, let me tell you, by no means, but I don't even know how a person can be an atheist, and I'm not saying this, God forbid, in a mean way, and live now, and not feel that there's somebody running the world. I mean, something, God is not a someone. How do you wake up in the morning? It's scary to think.
It's overwhelming. The weight of it's overwhelming.
Yeah, it's
Can't
overwhelming.
handle.
Right. It's overwhelming to think that Gannon decided the future of California by closing up the dams and not storing water in the reservoirs. He's no Joseph, that's all I could tell you. So now I want to share how he names his sons. When you see how he names his two sons, you know right away how he's healing and how he looks at his life. The naming of his sons is so telling.
She's such
And,
a good.
you know, I love Kabbalah, I love psychology, I love always the esoteric, but it's just gewaldic, as they say. Gewaldic means unbelievable. I try to share, by the way, what resonates with me in my life. I hope that it resonates with you. I really do, because that's the intention. So I try to share, when I prepare a class, I go through so many things, and I try to choose out things. Like I was reading something and I'm like, it doesn't resonate with me. Next. Does that mean? And also I felt a little guilty because it is from a great commentary, but I didn't connect to it. You know what I'm trying to say? So I couldn't connect to it. I'm like, if I can't connect to it, I don't know how I'm going to share it. But doesn't mean that commentary isn't a great person. It's just more like, I couldn't understand, like, what am I going to get out of that, in a sense? You know, I tell my teachers in Hebrew school, it's quality over quantity. It's not how much information you share with your kids, students. It's what will resonate with the student? What will connect them? What will get them excited about their Judaism? Not, oh, let's give them more information and more information until they're over information and not remember nothing of it. So that's basically like the point. So listen to how he names his sons, and then it's beautiful. So it says like this. Okay, let's find the pasuk. I prepared it. Okay, here. Okay, so this is, of course, he's back in Egypt. This is before he meets his brothers. Before the years of the famine came, and I'm reading from the pasuk Miketz, previous Torah portion, Joseph became the father of two sons. Who was his wife? Asnas, the daughter of Potiphar. Woo! Did you catch what happened here? Who tried to seduce him and got him into prison?
The daughter of Potiphar.
Potiphar's wife. She was enthralled by his beauty. He was extremely handsome and good looking. She wanted to have a relationship with him, an intimate. He ran away from her and put him into prison. He tried to attack me. He tried to hurt me. He tried to make an advance on me. Now, let's remember the Cinderella story. Who remembers the Cinderella story that I told a while back? Anybody remember it? Margaret, I see you know the story. Go ahead. Dinah is raped by Shechem. Remember, she's abducted and raped. She gets pregnant. She has a little girl called Osnat. Her family rescues her. She has a little girl, Osnat. She's shamed. Her daughter is shamed. This is from a relationship she was a hostage. This was no love affair, as people like to write in the Red Tent and other books that are fiction, totally fake. So what? The daughter is shamed. So her grandfather Jacob says to Dinah, his daughter, darling, let's send her to Egypt. She'll live with a beautiful family. Right. We'll provide for her. And her grandfather Jacob gives her a bracelet. And inside the bracelet, he writes in Hebrew letters, God shall protect you. Now, Joseph was so gorgeous and handsome, whenever he drove his chariot, when his driver drove him through the streets of Egypt, the girls were throwing themselves at him. Everybody wanted him. Everybody wanted to marry the prince of Egypt. How do we know about this? When Jacob blesses him, remember, he gives a blessing to the sons, and now he blesses Joseph. This is what he writes. A charming son is Joseph, a son charming to the eye. The women strode along to see him. When his father Jacob blesses him on his deathbed, he tells him, charming son. The women all wanted him. If we have time, we'll discuss how is this his last will and testament to Joseph. Do we need to hear how charming and gorgeous he was? That's what you tell your son? You're so charming and gorgeous, all the girls wanted you. Doesn't he have a little something substantial to tell his son? There's a whole nother exciting, interesting insight to this. But let me say, so what happens? Osnat knew she was from Jewish lineage, but she didn't know Joseph was, obviously. So when the girls are lining up on the streets to catch the eye of this gorgeous, handsome viceroy of Egypt, everyone throws handkerchiefs and they throw doilies and other things, and she throws her bracelet. And it lands on a chariot. And he picks it up and he sees inside the bracelet are words of God, Shavisi Hashem. Only a Jew would have written that. No Egyptian has Lashon HaKodesh, which was the language. So he says to his fellows, go find me the owner of this glass slipper.
Yes.
Right.
Really, Cinderella. It was
By the way,
amazing.
tons and tons. I did a class on the fairy tales of the Bible, how so many stories in the Torah are fairy tales. Cinderella, Rip Van Winkle. Another time we'll do it. So this is Cinderella. So the glass slipper, does it fit? So she ends up being adopted by Potiphar's family. Obviously, they were into buying slaves and adopting. And he finds out that she's Osnat. He calls her. She tells him that she's the daughter of Dinah. He knows what happened to his sister, but it's another mother. Remember, Dinah is Leah's child, and he marries her because Joseph is not marrying someone that's not from his family, from his ideology. He's not marrying any Egyptian girl roaming the streets, no matter how rich she is. He's only going to marry someone of the Jewish, you can't say faith, because remember, they didn't have the Torah yet, but someone who follows the ideology of his family in Israel. Otherwise, he's going to remain a bachelor. So look how the way of God works. Joseph ends up marrying the only Jewish girl living in Egypt, Osnas. And they give birth to two beautiful sons. And look what he names them. Okay, so let me go back to that. And if we have time, I'll explain why the blessing his father gives him is about his beauty. By the way, that's why Potiphar's wife wanted to seduce him. He was gorgeous. He was stunning, physically beautiful. So God didn't only make him with a energy that was gorgeous and outstanding. He was physically extreme. I mean, how gifted is that? He's gorgeous outside. He's gorgeous inside. I mean, I want a Yosef. Do they exist? Okay. So, okay. So he marries Osnat. Now Joseph named the firstborn Menashe, meaning God has made me forget completely my hardship and my parental homes.
How could that
Ki
work?
Menashe, ki nashani elakim, nashani. I forgot my hardship. But then what does nashani really mean? Does it mean only forget? It means move away. Here you begin to see the therapy, the internal therapy, the internal transformation and metamorphosis in what happens to him. How does he dealing with the trauma? When he has his firstborn son, Menashe, he says, God has made me able to move away from my hardship. In other words, my trust in God, my faith in God has allowed me to move past my hardship because I realized I was not sold, I was sent. I wasn't buried, I was planted. Ani Yosef. I have an identity that rose from the ashes. Step one in his healing. You move away from your hardship. You make peace with what happened to you. Not you forget, you never forget your pain. And how do you know that Joseph did not become a hardened, sometimes people go through trauma and they become hard and tough. Like I met a woman and she made like a comment to me at one of these Hadassah events. And I was a little taken aback. And a woman near me said, you know, she went through this and this and that. I'm like, okay, that explains it. Because why would you make a comment to a person you don't even know? So people go through trauma and how do they deal? They become rough, tough, mean. And you don't blame them for that way, but you don't want to be with them either, you know. Okay, but here you see, he says, God allowed me to move past my pain. Now he has a second son. What does he name that one? Get ready for this one. And the second he named Ephraim, the younger one now. Okay, Diane, test me. Who's the youngest? Who's the older?
Menashe.
Who's the younger? Ephraim. Who got the blessing of the right hand? Ephraim. Okay.
Ephraim.
I've
been paying attention.
So what does he say? Why does he name him Ephraim? God has made me fertile in the land of my affliction. The Eshem Hasheni Kara Ephraim Ki HaPurani Elakim Be'eretz Aniyah. By the way, Hebrew is so much prettier. The English is not as beautiful. God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So step 2 in healing. I moved away from my pain, but what did I do with that? I became successful. I became fruitful. Many times you move away from pain, but you cannot rise. You can't succeed in life. Here, not only he moves away from his pain, he succeeds. He becomes fruitful. He becomes viceroy of Egypt. That's the healing. The 2-point Torah teaches us how he heals. The Torah is giving us the blueprint for healing after trauma, abuse, pain, betrayal. I mean, you could use every negative adjective on what happened to him. Prison, slavery, everything. Every time he's in a good place, something happens. He's the Potiphar's chief of command of his operations. Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him. He gets put into prison. He's in prison. He interprets the dreams, and the butler forgets about him for 2 years. Every time he catches a break, he falls flat on his face. And yet, he names his children, and he says, now I could come to my brothers and say, I am Joseph. Because you told me, I become who I become. And this is really the story of everybody, because everybody has a challenge. Everybody has something that happens to you or happened to you that causes you pain and anguish. So many times, we as Jewish women or women in general have that quality of rehashing. They say, what's Jewish guilt? You forget it. What's Jewish Alzheimer's? You forget everything but the guilt. That's our story. Women were always blaming ourselves and rehashing, and it's hard, we have memories like elephants. We remember every pain and hurt that happened to us. You forgot my anniversary 25 years ago. Remember that? Remember? Remember you came late on our anniversary? You came late for dinner. Remember that one? Honey, that was 40 years ago. So we always rehash. My husband said, Freida, you were gifted with a memory like an elephant. Good for you, terrible for me, he says. So that's the story, Ani Yosef. And you want to be able to wake up and say, I need Freida. I am Freida. I am Dina, Devora, Margalit. Robin, you're Devora?
Rivka.
Rivka. And who are you?
Jolene.
Wake up. Julie?
Jolene.
I need Jolene. Don't worry, Jolene. I need Jolene. There's always something. I am Jolene. And that is the Torah portion of Vayechi. Vayechi means to live. How do you really live? You have to ask yourself. And a very, very important thing to remember is you are here, and only you could be who you are. No one else could be you. You can't be me. I can't be you. We all have to fulfill our destiny, our mission, our purpose. And next week, I'm going to share with you as an opener. I was going to share it today, but we're running out of time. I don't want to, truth in advertising. It says 10 to 11. It's 10 to 11. It's 11:05. I found a letter from one of the previous Rebbes that defines, let's leave this question open. Maybe we could discuss it next week. Every company, every successful business has a mission statement. What are your goals? What are your objectives? Every human being on earth has to have a mission statement. Why am I here? What is my purpose? So this letter from I think the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe outlines 10 steps that you have to ask yourself in establishing your mission statement as a human being, as a Jewish person on earth. Why am I here? What is my mission? What is my purpose? It's key to developing your talents, your energy, knowing when you wake up in the morning and you put your hands together and you say, Moda ani lifanecha melech chai v'kayam, shechazarti b'nishmasi b'chem l'rabba menusecha. Thank you, God, for giving me back my soul. That's basically what you say when you wake up in the morning. And the reason we say it when we wake up in the morning and we put our hands like this, pointing to our heart, is the minute you wake up in the morning, before you do the ritual washing, you are already establishing a connection to your mission and purpose and God, which fuels that. The minute you wake up in the morning, before you do anything, you're already establishing why you're here. I'm here. I have a mission. I have a godly soul. Thank you, God, for giving me that. And now I can start my day. You have no idea that this one little sentence that takes a millisecond to say transforms your day. So we'll leave it at that. I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos, a week of peace and harmony,